Hello, everybody. I hope you're excited to hear about foreign policy because that is what Chapter 14 is all about. I've done my best to see if we can consolidate these lectures. So I am going to move through these rather quickly and discuss major points with you. And then your job is going to be to study this on your own as well by looking through your book and filling in any gaps. The quiz this week has a total of 15 questions, and section 1 in this lecture will have a total of 4 questions, okay? So let's get started. This section is discussing making foreign policy and the basics of foreign policy. Um, to get started, foreign policy is a nation's set of plans and procedures for dealing with foreign countries. A nation's foreign policy reflects its own values, and this is true for the United States. Our foreign policy reflects American political values, such as believing in democracy, for example. There are 5 goals of foreign policy. And the 5 goals of foreign policy for the United States first is national security. And this is perhaps the primary priority of any government, and we are no different. The US looks to create a balance between the interests of national security and the protection of citizens' rights, freedoms, and property. The second goal of foreign policy is to establish free and open trade. Um, the US is looking to provide markets for US goods and also to import desired goods from overseas. The third goal would be promoting world peace and a healthy environment. World peace and a healthy environment are tied closely to national security. When countries are at peace, the US is less likely to be drawn into conflicts, and so this is critical for our national security. Fourth, supporting democracy. And, and to take that further, supporting democratic governments. The US has its interests best served by stabilizing the world, and we believe that supporting democratic governments will help bring global security as well as security to our own nation. And finally, providing aid to people in need, number 5. The US spends about $27 billion every year on humanitarian aid, and this includes things like money, um, food, or military assistance. So there's several different schools of thought that have developed on how active a role the United States should be involved in foreign affairs. And so we are going to take a look at a few of these different schools of thought. So until World War I, the United States mostly followed a policy of isolationism, which is kind of the idea that we don't want to get involved or dragged into other nations' conflicts. We felt that that would keep us safer. However, when World War I took place, we couldn't help but to get dragged into the conflict. Whether we liked it or not, we were being affected during that war. Germany attacked boats carrying American passengers. And so, and then finally, it looked like there was a conspiracy between Germany and Mexico to become allies. And the United States was directly threatened and had no choice but to be involved. And so, after this World War, the United States' view on foreign policy was forever changed. Let me see, I actually skipped ahead here. So, a few of these different approaches, they have a lot in common and some subtle differences. So, let's go through and kind of summarize them. The first approach is realism, and it's the opposite of an isolation stance. So, realism is related to an internationalist approach to foreign policy, which promotes cooperation between nations. They believe that an active role in international affairs is the best way to pursue international security, or sorry, to pursue national security. And they also believe that a show of force is sometimes necessary. Realists support the United States forging alliances with any nation that will serve our national interests as well. Neo-isolationism is a new brand of isolationism. And remember, isolationism is what we believed mostly prior to World War One. So it's a new brand of isolationism. It's also known as neo-isolationism. And they believe that US involvement with foreign countries should be kept to an absolute minimum, and that we should let other countries determine their own fate. They believe that our interference is not always welcome by other nations, and that it could lead the United States into prolonged military conflict. So, as you can see, this realist or internationalist approach is quite different than neo isolationism. And then finally, the next or last approach we're going to discuss is idealism. And some people also call it liberalism. So, this is the belief that um, unlike realists, they consider not only the interests of the United States, but also other countries' interests as well. So realists and idealists are very similar. They believe that you must interact with other nations, but where they differ is the realist says we have to take the US's best interests into account, and idealist says we need to take all nations' best interests into account. They believe in a strong defense of human rights, and they oppose alliances with authoritarian governments, even if it is in the United States' best interest. So there are several tools of foreign policy. Um, the US often relies on persuasion and power to pursue its foreign interest goals. And the US also relies on three types of foreign policy tools. The first type is diplomatic tools, the second type is economic tools, and the third type is military tools, which is probably what we are the most familiar with. So diplomatic tools involves advancing the United States global presence. And as such, we have over 160 embassies or diplomatic centers around the world. Diplomatic tools also includes making treaties with foreign nations, and also includes entering into defense alliances with other nations. So, the guaranteed mutual defense is an example of collective security or an attempt at keeping international peace and order. So, we believe with diplomatic tools that we should establish our presence in other nations, that we should make treaties with other nations, and that we can also establish defense alliances, saying if someone attacks you, I will come in and help you to defend yourself. For example, in, let's see, in the Iraq War, the second war in Iraq, we had an alliance with the United Kingdom. And so when the United States was attacked and decided to enter Afghanistan, uh, the United Kingdom was right there with us. And then later, when it was decided to enter into Iraq, because it was believed there were weapons of mass destruction, the United Kingdom was our principal ally. Let's see. The second type of tool used in used in foreign policy is actually an economic tool, economic tools. So this can include giving financial aid or withholding money. And it can also include economic sanctions, which are economic measures taken against a country to force it to change its policies. So sometimes these economic sanctions might not only hurt the other nation, but can hurt ourselves. It can limit who we trade with and what goods we can export. And other critics also say that sanctions hurt the people of the country. Um, like the citizens, women and children, innocent people. Um, but on the flip side of that coin, they economic sanctions can be pretty effective. And finally, we have military tools, which can include military force and declarations of war. All right. So this is a little infographic taken from your textbook, which kind of examines economic sanctions a little bit more closely. And I recommend that you read it because this is something that you hear about all the time in the news. And I think it's really relevant. So go ahead and examine this with a lot more depth on your own time and read about it in your textbook. This now brings us to the just war theory. So there's a theory of warfare that has roots in Western thought, and it's known as the just war theory. Just not as in the word only, like only war, just as in is it fair, is it justified? So justified war theory, which is that a state may justly go to war under certain specific circumstances and must limit its conduct according to certain standards. Okay, so when it comes to the just war theory, there's two different categories, or two different, let me see, areas of this theory. There's the jus ad bellum and jus in bello. So jus ad bellum means justice of war. So this relates to um, entering war, okay? So the first principle under justice of war includes an open declaration of war and having just cause. So sneaking in, not openly declaring war is seen as not just, and also having an immoral cause, like, oh, we just want to take their resources for ourselves, might not be considered a just cause. But like defending yourself could be considered as a just cause. The second principle is having just intentions. Okay. And then third, you must ask yourself, um, is it worth the cost? Is the benefits possibly gained worth the potential cost? Is there a chance of winning? And is it the only option? So if the costs will outweigh the benefit to your nation, if you have no chance of winning, is it right to send people and soldiers in to die? And if there are other options, those options should be exercised before the entering of war. Now, jus ad bello is Latin for justice in war, and this is the main principle of jus in bello is saying that let's see, that there is a just peace outcome. So I recommend reading a little bit more on this on page 445 in your textbook. Um, but jus in bello, for example, can limit the conduct of war to necessary military targets only. So jus ad bellum is talking about things that must be considered before entering war, and jus in bello discusses what is right, what is just in the act of war, and this revolves around like the conduct in war, right? Like not committing terrible atrocities, using biological warfare, torturing, attacking places like orphanages, schools, or hospitals, things like that. The book does go over this briefly, so I think that this could be really interesting and informative for you to read about, to do some further research. Uh, that does bring us to the end of section 1. I did go through it quickly. I wanted to hit the main points, and we did. Um, if you go to page uh, 446, it will describe the simulation that we're actually going to be doing this week. So the things we're going to be doing in class this week relate to this topic. So the quiz questions for this section, there's 4 questions and they are matching. Question number 1, the answer is B. A nation's set of plans and procedures for dealing with foreign countries is B. Foreign policy. Number 2, the answer is C. Approach to foreign policy that promotes staying out of world affairs and focusing on domestic issues in order to protect a country from war is C. Isolationism. Number 3 is A. Economic sanctions. Foreign policy tool that may involve withholding money or restricting imports and exports to force social or political change is A. Economic sanctions. Question 4 is D. Just war theory. Idea that a state may rightfully go to war under certain specific circumstances, and that once at war it must limit its conduct according to certain standards. D. Just war theory. All right, that's it for us today, guys. Thank you so much for paying attention, and I look forward to you hearing my terrible preschool teacher voice in section 2.